Chapter 7. Greed. There was a lot of money to be made building the Brooklyn Bridge. Many businessmen hoped to get rich supplying the materials for the bridge. They wanted to sell stone for the towers, steel for the roadway, and the wire for the cables. Even before the work started, there were politicians who wanted to get rich from the bridge too. In New York at that time, many politicians were dishonest. They took bribes before okaying many city projects. If the Brooklyn Bridge was going to be built, the politicians wanted to be kept happy. Boss Tweed. The most famous dishonest politician in New York City was a man named William M. Tweed, who was the boss of the Democratic Party. He controlled nearly all the Democrats who were elected to office. Everyone called him Boss Tweed. Whenever banks or businesses wanted a certain law passed that would help them make money, they had to bribe Boss Tweed. Whenever someone wanted to build a public building, they had to double the price and then give Boss Tweed half of the profits. Boss Tweed was so rich, he owned land and buildings all over New York City. He owned a huge hotel. He was a big shot at several companies, a bank, a railroad, and a printing company. Even the mayor and the governor of New York took orders from him. Everyone knew they had better go along with Boss Tweed or nothing would get done. It was no different with the Brooklyn Bridge. To get permission to build the bridge, a law had to be passed. So, Boss Tweed had to be paid. He got more than $50,000 in cash. It was taken to him from Brooklyn in a carpet bag. While in power, Boss Tweed stole more than $75 million from New York. Finally, however, he was brought to justice and died in jail. Before his death, he confessed to all his crimes. He admitted that the Brooklyn Bridge was one of his crooked deals. Besides politicians, some men in charge of building the bridge were willing to cheat to make more money. They gave out jobs to friends who would help them make money. When it was time to decide who should make the wire for the bridge cables, a man named J. Lloyd Hague got the job. He planned to charge way too much for the cheap, faulty wire he was going to make. That way, he'd make a lot of money. Then he'd hand over some of the extra cash to the man who gave him the job. Giving money back this way is called a kickback. This upset Washington Roebling for two reasons. For one thing, he really wanted the job. It only seemed right that his father's wire company make the wire for a bridge he and his father had designed. But he also wanted the bridge to be built safely and correctly, and he knew that Hague was not an honest man. Washington was afraid that Hague would make bad wire, so he told the men in charge to make sure to test every single batch of wire that came from Hague. Even so, Hague managed to get around the wire tests. He used several tricks. For example, he would let the wire inspector test a good batch of wire. As soon as it passed the test, he put it on a cart and pretended to drive it to the bridge. But as soon as the cart was out of sight, Hague took the good wire off the cart and put bad wire on. He sent the good wire back to his own factory. He sent the bad wire directly to the bridge. The next day, Hague would do the same thing all over again. He showed one batch of good wire to the inspector and then sent bad wire to the bridge. Fortunately, Washington found out, and he was furious. However, bad wire was already being woven into the bridge cable. Every day, thin strands of wire were being pulled back and forth across the tower to make the huge cables. There was no way to get it out. Washington wanted Hague fired, but the men in charge wouldn't do it. They didn't want to admit their mistake in giving Hague the job. The bad wire was so poorly made, it snapped in half, like breaking a piece of uncooked spaghetti. What if the bridge cable snapped in half? The whole roadway would fall down. But Washington realized that the bridge would be okay as long as they used good wire from now on. The bridge had been designed to be 6 times stronger than it needed to be. Now it would only be 5 times stronger. That was still good enough. After Haig was caught cheating, the wire inspectors watched him like a hawk. They made sure every batch of wire was good. Still, Haig made an extra $300,000 from his lies and tricks. Meanwhile, Washington Roebling was only being paid $10,000 a year, and he was in charge of the whole bridge. When the cables were finally complete in October 1878, Haig was out of a job. A few years later, he went to prison for writing bad checks. Now what? The next step was to wrap the huge cables in wire. After that, the workers would attach the wire suspenders that would hold up the roadway. Who would provide the wire this time? For that job, there was only one choice: Washington Roebling. Finally, Washington was given the work, the respect, and the money he was due.